For years, Mara told herself that the bruise on her cheek from her father's hand was something she had deserved. That was the lie she carried into adulthood. It sat in her chest the way old injuries do. Quiet until you pressed on them, and then unbearable. She grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house that looked perfectly ordinary from the street. White siding, a Canada flag on the porch, the kind of front lawn her father, Kenneth, kept immaculately trimmed because appearances mattered to him more than anything else in this world. More than her mother, Sylvia. More than her older brother, Wade. Certainly more than Mara. She was the youngest, the only daughter. And in Kenneth's mind, that meant she belonged to him in a way that Wade never did. Wade got to grow up and leave and make his own mistakes, and Kenneth let him. Even bragged about the boy at dinner parties. But Mara was different. Mara was the thing he was going to get right. She remembered the first time she understood what that meant. She was 14. She had come home from school with a permission slip for a class trip to Ottawa. 3 days, a museum visit, Parliament Hill, a chance to see the country beyond Sudbury for the first time in her life. She was so excited she had filled out her part of the form on the bus ride home. Kenneth read it at the kitchen table while Sylvia stood at the stove, stirring something she never looked at. He folded the paper in half and set it down. "You're not going," he said. Mara asked why. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was Kenneth's way. The silence that told you the conversation was already over, that you had stepped somewhere you weren't supposed to step, and the best thing you could do now was back up and pretend you'd never moved. Sylvia kept stirring. Mara went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, looking at the wall. She didn't go to Ottawa. She told her teacher she was sick. She watched her classmates come back with photos and souvenirs and stories about the changing of the guard, and she smiled and said it looked like fun. She had already started learning how to make her face do what was needed. By the time she was 22, she was very good at it. She was studying nursing at Laurentian, working part-time at a pharmacy on LaSalle, trying to save enough to eventually move out. Not far, just her own apartment, something small with a window that faced east and a kitchen she could cook in without someone watching. She had a plan. It wasn't dramatic. She wasn't running away to Paris. She just wanted a door with her name on it. That was the year she met Theo. Theo Barker. 30, worked in insurance, drove a sensible car, and had the kind of smile that made you feel immediately at ease. He asked her out for coffee after they met at a mutual friend's birthday gathering. And she said yes before she'd thought about it, which was unusual for her. She was not someone who said yes before thinking. But she did. She didn't tell Kenneth for 2 months. She told Sylvia first, in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning when Kenneth was out, and Sylvia's face did something complicated, a flicker of happiness that pulled back quickly, the way a hand pulls back from a hot element. "He's a good man?" Sylvia asked. "I think so. Mom, does he have steady work?" "Yes." Sylvia nodded. She didn't say anything else. She turned back to the counter and began organizing things that were already organized. Mara told Kenneth that Saturday at dinner. She said it calmly, the way she had practiced, setting her fork down first, so her looked at her for a long and still Kenneth looked at her for a long time. "Who is he?" said. "Not a question, a demand," she told him. She said Theo's full name, his profession, where he was from. Timmins, originally, hoping the details would help, hoping information would soften what she could already see forming in her father's eyes. "You're not done school," Kenneth said. "I have a year left. It's not like that. We're just seeing each other. I didn't say you could date anyone." She was 22 years old. She was a nursing student with a part-time job and a savings account she'd built herself. She knew all of this. She said carefully, "Dad, I'm an adult. I'm not asking permission." That was the moment everything shifted. She saw it in his body before he moved, the way his shoulders squared, the way he set down his fork with too much precision. Sylvia made a small sound beside her, something between a word and a breath, and then Kenneth stood up and crossed around the table and slapped Mara across the face so hard her vision went sideways. The sound of it filled the room. Mara sat very still, her cheek burned, her eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall because she knew, somehow, that crying would be the wrong thing. It would give him something, and she was done giving him things. Sylvia did not stand up. Sylvia did not say a word. She sat at the table and looked at her plate, and that silence, that specific, devastating silence, cut deeper than Kenneth's hand had. Mara picked up her fork. She ate the rest of her dinner. She helped clear the dishes. She said goodnight and went upstairs and locked her door and sat on the floor with her back against the bed and pressed both palms against her burning cheek and let herself shake, finally, where no one could see. She did not tell Theo what had happened. She should have. She knew that later. But she had spent so many years managing her father's moods, containing the fallout, keeping things smooth on the surface, that she did it automatically. She smoothed things over with Theo too, said dinner had been fine, said her dad was just old-fashioned, said it was nothing. Theo believed her because she was very convincing. They dated for another 8 months. They were good months. Mara finished her nursing degree. She got a position at Health Sciences North, starting in the fall. She found an apartment on Elgin Street, 2 floors up, east-facing window, exactly what she'd pictured, and she signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon and stood in the empty living room for 5 minutes just breathing. She moved out on a Saturday in September. Kenneth did not help her move. He spent the day in the garage. When she loaded the last box into Wade's truck, she went inside to say goodbye and found her mother in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a tea mug that had gone cold. "Call me when you get there," Sylvia said. "I will, Mom." Sylvia looked up at her. For a moment, just a moment, something passed across her face that might have been an apology. Or a question, just grief, the kind that comes from a life spent choosing the easier silence. Then she looked back at her mug. Mara drove away. She did not cry this time. She felt lighter than she had in years, and she hated a little bit that it felt like escape, because she hadn't done anything wrong. She had just left. That shouldn't feel like survival. But it did. She and Theo moved in together the following spring. Theo's idea, and she agreed. She loved him, she was sure of that. And the apartment on Elgin was always a bit small for 2 people anyway. They found a place on Kathleen Street, a proper 2-bedroom, with a backyard that got afternoon sun. For a while, things were good. This is the part Mara found hardest to talk about later. The while, because it really was good, not a performance, not her managing someone else's moods. Theo cooked dinner some nights. They went to Killarney one weekend and canoed on the lake until her arms burned pleasantly, and he made her laugh so hard on the drive home that she had to ask him to stop talking so she could catch her breath. She thought, this is what it's supposed to be. She thought, maybe the worst is behind me. She thought this right up until the money came. Her grandmother on her mother's side, Nana Ruth, a tiny fierce woman from Cape Breton who had worked her whole life and trusted no one, passed away in the February of that year and left Mara $40,000. Mara had not expected it. No one had. Nana Ruth hadn't discussed her estate with anyone. She had simply handled it, quietly and precisely, the way she had handled everything. Theo was warm about it at first, said they should celebrate, took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Sudbury, ordered wine she didn't recognize the name of, raised his glass and said it was incredible, that Nana Ruth must have really loved her. She did, Mara said, and felt the grief come back up briefly before she swallowed it. 2 weeks later, Theo suggested they renovate the basement. It was a practical idea. She thought it was a practical idea. She agreed. They talked about it over breakfast, worked out rough numbers on a napkin, and Mara said she'd contribute some of the inheritance to cover costs. What she had not quite understood, what she would only understand much later, looking back with the clarity that hindsight brings like cold water, was that the moment she said yes to the basement, she had told Theo something. Not in words, in the fact of it. She had told him the money was accessible, that she would share it, that her resources were his to suggest uses for. After the basement, he suggested a truck. His car was getting old, he said. It made financial sense in the long run. She said she wasn't sure. He said she was being careful to the point of paranoia. She felt, for the first time, a small cold thing settle in her stomach. She said she'd think about it. He said fine. He said it was fine, but his voice was the same specific flatness that Kenneth's voice used to go, before Kenneth would go quiet for 3 days and make the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. She recognized it. She had grown up breathing that particular air. She did not buy the truck. That was in some ways the beginning of the end. Not a dramatic end. Theo never raised his hand to her. She wanted to be precise about that, because she knew how important precision was, knew people would ask about it. He never hit her. What he did was quieter than that and harder to name. He began to make her feel, slowly and consistently, that her instincts were wrong, that she was too sensitive, that she remembered things incorrectly, that the reason she felt uneasy was something inside her, some damage she'd carried from her father's house, not anything he was doing. And the terrible thing was she almost believed him. Because he was right that she had damage. She did. She just hadn't understood yet that damage doesn't make you wrong about everything. It just makes you easier to convince. She started talking to her colleague at the hospital, a woman named Faye who had a way of listening that made Mara feel like her words landed somewhere solid. Faye didn't offer advice. She just asked questions, simple ones, like, how do you feel when you try to talk about money with him? And when was the last time he asked how you were doing? Mara had to sit with those questions longer than she expected. She went home that evening and set the table, and Theo came in and sat down without taking off his jacket and looked at his phone through most of dinner. And she watched him across the table and thought, I know this feeling. I know what it is to sit at a table and feel completely alone inside of it. She had promised herself she would never live like that again. She made an appointment with a counselor at the hospital's employee assistance program. She didn't tell Theo. She went on her lunch breaks, sitting in a small office with houseplants on the windowsill, and a woman named Dr. Arsenault who had a calm so complete it felt almost contagious. It took 4 months. 4 months of lunch breaks and hard conversations and nights lying awake running through her own memories like someone checking a list, making sure she hadn't invented things. She hadn't. She knew that by the end of it, she hadn't invented anything. She left Theo on a Thursday in November. She had planned it carefully, took what was hers, left what was his, called her friend Bev, and stayed in the spare room on Mackenzie for 3 weeks while she sorted out the next step. Theo called. He said she was making a mistake. He said she was running away from her problems like she always did. He said she needed help, real help, and he hoped she would get it. She blocked his number. She said it to herself quietly, alone in Bev's spare room with the door closed. Just his number. Just that. Then she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, looking at the wall. The way she had at 14, in her childhood bedroom, with the unearned ache of someone who has done nothing wrong and cannot understand why they are the one paying for it. But this time something was different. Something had shifted in her, down in the place where the old lies lived. Because she was 31 years old, and she was a registered nurse, and she had walked out of 2 houses that had slowly tried to make her disappear, and she was still here. She was still here. That counted for something. She was just beginning to understand how much. The following April, she transferred to a hospital in Kingston. A fresh start was how she explained it to the people who asked, and it was true enough. Kingston was smaller in some ways and bigger in others. Closer to Toronto, closer to the water, a different kind of light. She found an apartment on Princess Street, 2nd floor, east-facing window. She stood in the living room the first morning and made coffee and listened to the particular silence of a space that was entirely her own, and she felt it then. Not happiness exactly, something quieter and more durable, the feeling of having survived yourself. She called her mother that afternoon. They had been talking more, in small careful ways, circling something neither of them had named yet. Sylvia asked how the apartment was, whether the neighborhood seemed safe, if she'd found a good grocery store nearby. Mara answered all of it. Then she said, Mom, I need to ask you something. Sylvia went quiet on the other end. Why didn't you say anything? Mara asked. That night, at the table, when Dad... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The silence stretched. Long enough that Mara thought her mother might simply deflect, might change the subject, might do what she had always done. But Sylvia said, in a voice that sounded smaller and older than Mara had ever heard it, I was afraid of him. 3 words. Just that. I know that's not enough, Sylvia said. I know that. Mara looked out the window. The lake was visible from here, a strip of gray-blue at the end of a side street, and she watched it for a moment the way you watch something that has always been there and that you have only just noticed. It's not enough, Mara said. But I hear you. It was not forgiveness, not that afternoon. But it was a door left slightly open, and that was something. That was more than nothing. Her father called once, 3 months after she moved to Kingston. She saw his name on the screen and felt the old familiar clench, the body's memory, always faster than the mind's. She let it ring. She let it go to voicemail. She did not listen to the voicemail that day or the next. 2 weeks later, she listened to it. Kenneth's voice was the same, measured, controlled, everything in its place. He said he hoped she was well. He said Kingston was a good city. He said he didn't understand why she always had to make things difficult. Mara deleted it. She thought about calling back for several days, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand. In the end, she wrote him a letter instead, actual paper, the old-fashioned kind. She wrote 4 drafts. The first one was angry. The second one was sad. The third one was too careful, too managed, too much like the face she had learned to make. The fourth one was honest. She told him what his hand had felt like, across her face when she was 22. She told him what his silence had felt like for every year before that. She told him she was not going to spend any more of her life inside the shape of what he wanted her to be. She did not ask him to respond. She did not tell him she forgave him, because she didn't. Not yet. And she was done saying things she didn't mean to keep peace she didn't feel. She mailed it on a Tuesday morning on the way to work. She never heard back. She spent a long time thinking that meant he was unmoved. And then she spent some time thinking it might mean the opposite. That there was nothing to say because she had at last said the true thing, and there was no argument to make against the true thing. She didn't know. She decided eventually that it didn't matter. She had written the letter for herself, not him. It had landed where it needed to land. By the time winter came, Mara had settled into Kingston the way you settle into a coat that actually fits. She had good colleagues at the hospital. She had found a running trail along the waterfront that she used in the mornings before shifts. The lake, still and silver in the early light. She had started cooking properly. Real dinners. Things that took more than 20 minutes. Partly because she finally had a kitchen she enjoyed being in, and partly because she had read somewhere that taking care of your body was an act of respect toward yourself, and she was trying to practice that. She had Bev, who came to visit in November and stayed a long weekend, and they ate too much and walked through the market, and didn't talk about Theo or Kenneth at all, and somehow that was exactly right. She had Dr. Arsenal's voice in her head on the hard days, the questions she'd learned to ask herself: is this true or does it only feel true? Whose voice is that? Is this fear or is this knowledge? She was learning the difference. She was not yet healed, if healed was even the right word. She doubted it was. You didn't heal from a childhood the way you healed from a sprain. It was more like learning to walk differently. Finding out which parts of the floor held your weight. Adjusting your gait over years. There were still mornings she woke up and the first thought was an old one. Something worn and diminishing. A voice that sounded like Kenneth, or like Theo, or like the worst parts of herself. She was getting better at noticing it for what it was. Just a thought, not a verdict. Spring came fast in Kingston that year. She remembered it later as the season she finally stopped waiting for something bad to happen. Not because she was certain nothing would. She was a nurse. She knew better than anyone how quickly things could change. But because she had slowly, painstakingly, built a life that belonged to her. Her shifts. Her apartment. Her east-facing window. Her trail along the water. Her own name on the door. One Saturday in May, she went to a farmer's market on Princess Street and bought tomatoes and sourdough bread and a small bunch of tulips that were more orange than yellow. And she walked home in the mild lake air and put the tulips in a mason jar on her kitchen table and stood there looking at them for a moment. She thought about the 14-year-old on the bus with the permission slip. The 22-year-old pressing her palms to her burning cheek on a locked bedroom floor. The 31-year-old sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed, learning the strange weight of her own survival. She thought about all the versions of herself that had gotten her here. Then she put the kettle on and opened the window, and the lake air came in, and the tulips bent slightly toward the light, the way living things do, and Mara let herself feel, quietly and without performance, exactly where she was. Here, intact, her own. That was enough. That was, she had finally learned, more than enough.